Hello everyone, welcome to this video in which I will read you some of the comments posted on a recent video of mine and react to some of the criticism. So here's what happened, right? I made lots of videos this year, more than 20, and all the videos are packed full of information, and I play and I show you tab. And then I made one video in which I just talk for more than 20 minutes, and it was completely unscripted. I knew the subjects I was going to talk about, and I made a little list with those 5 subjects, but it was completely unscripted, just my honest thoughts. And exactly that video is being watched by 35,000 people in a week. And of course, many of those people have no idea who I am, and they just saw some guy that they didn't know talk about learning how to play jazz or what skills you need to become a good jazz musician. And I said many things that probably offended them, and many people were very mad at me, and I got all kinds of reactions, and I understand the reactions, even reactions like these. Of course, when you see a guy in your suggested videos on YouTube sitting with a guitar and it has this title, you expect this person to teach you some cool licks or some theory, and I didn't do any of that. So probably you're there with your guitar waiting to learn something, and then I didn't do it, so you get frustrated. So you write these kinds of reactions, and I would never do it, but I can remember many times that I was thinking that when I was watching a tutorial and there was too much talking and not enough playing. So my apologies to all those people that thought it was going to be a tutorial. And if you watch this video, please check out my other videos, because I promise you it will be chock full of information. And I want to thank all of the people that made positive reactions. I got many positive reactions on this thread, and even in private messages, even by famous jazz musicians. And I'm talking about people that you all know, that you bought CDs from, went to concerts. They took the time to send me messages, and they said that they thought I was on point. They maybe had some other points they wanted to discuss, but in general they felt the video was very honest, and I told a lot of things that they agreed with, and that made me happy. So I'm very sorry I'm not gonna show you the positive comments, even though of course I should show that, but it's less entertaining. And also I want to react to some of the criticisms and look at what people have said and if there's any merit in it, at least to my opinion. So again, these are all my opinions, and what I have to say might be very far from the truth. It's just my opinion. So if you get mad at me again, then post down in the comments, and who knows, maybe I'll do another video. So let's just look at some comments I selected. So the first comment, I have my tablet here, is by Claude Dietrich, and he writes, "This is such nonsense. Jazz is hard, as is Chinese. Jazz is a language, as is Chinese. You cannot speak Mandarin fluently without your usual 10,000 hours of very hard work, and this only if you are gifted. So is jazz." So let's look at this first linea. This is very obviously not true. Jazz is a language. I can go with that. I heard that before, and there's many similarities. But you cannot speak Mandarin fluently without your usual 10,000 hours of very hard work. I know there's tons of people that can speak fluently Chinese without hard work, who are maybe not very gifted at learning languages. And I mean, there's a name for those kind of people. They're called Chinese people, right? Okay, that's kind of a lame joke, but you know what I mean. The best way to learn how to speak Chinese is growing up with people around you that speak fluent Chinese and trying to mimic their words, their sentences, the inflections, the intonation, and see what the results are if you say those words. Are people reacting the way that you want them to react? If you're hungry and you ask for food, are you doing it the correct way? Or are they bringing you a chair? Then obviously you're not doing it the correct way, and you make corrections to your speech, right? And people that are very good at Chinese, i.e. grown-up Chinese adults, they might correct you, say, when you say that word, you should say it in this way, because if you say it in the way that you're saying it now, it means something different. Anyway, you probably grow up to speak Chinese fluently without knowing any of the grammar or without doing any hard work. I mean, hard work on purpose. And maybe you can see where I'm going with this, because that's the way I approach learning jazz. I try approaching it, learning as a language, like a kid would learn it, surrounded by fluent speaking Chinese people, or in this case, fluently playing jazz people. So by mimicking the greats, the jazz masters, by learning their phrases, by studying their phrasing and the accents they use and the slurring, you're actually learning jazz as a language in the way that a kid would learn it. And the way that he proposes to learn it is teaching somebody grammar of not just one language, but let's say grammar of a group of languages that are very similar. Let's say Germanic languages. You teach them the grammar, and then you play them some speaking German, and then you say, well, now go to Germany and have conversations with the Germans there. First of all, the things you say probably make no sense. They sound like gibberish. Maybe you have some of the words, but especially when you start speaking to other German people, they might not understand you, they might laugh at you. It doesn't sound like German to them. So that's the same. If you learn music theory and modes and scales without learning the subtleties of a certain style you're trying to play, let's say you're trying to play bebop, and you didn't study the exact phrases that bebop players play, even though they might all play differently, they all have a similar kind of vocabulary, similar kind of embellishments and phrasing. If you go to a session, bebop session, and you start trying to mimic that with the theory you have, the grammar, it's gonna sound like crap, and people are not gonna call you for any bebop gigs, because it's pretty much impossible to play bebop or any style with that information. So in order to improve, then you have to translate, you have to use the grammar you have, the mode you have, and see what you have to change in the mode or have to add. And it's a lot of work. And that's what I meant when I say you're taking the long way. I said it in another video. You're taking the long way if you think that studying theory and grammar, theory and modes and core theory, if you're taking the long way if you think that leads to playing good jazz lines. The fastest way is by mimicking people that already play good jazz lines. And no, you're not just copying them. You're starting out by learning the phrases, and then you start to combine them in creative ways, hopefully. That's what you do when you learn a language, right? You learn sentences, you learn words, but then you want to ask for something, for some action to be performed by other people that you never heard anyone else ask. And you start combining words, and you see the results. If it works, you remember it. It's the same thing. You start combining phrases in jazz improvisation, and if it sounds great and everybody is reacting positively to it, and you hear it back and you think, oh, that sounds great, you remember it, and that's the way you create your own style. Or hopefully that's what should happen. Okay, let's look at the second paragraph, because it's also interesting. He says, guys like the one in this video, oh, that's me, who pretends to the contrary are in only for the money. Namely, subscribe to my site and soon enough, and in a few days, you'll be Gilad Hexelman. Total nonsense. Well, this is total nonsense, because all the information I have is free on YouTube. It costs no money. In fact, I have a Patreon, but I usually say, if you can't afford it, don't join the Patreon. Enjoy the content for free. So it makes no sense. Yeah, let's go to the next comments. Let's look at this one by Bob Blues. It says, sorry, Christian. He spelled my name correctly with 2 A's. That's great, because most people spell it with one A. Sorry, Christian, but as a horn player, I do need to know and hear everything that is going on with the other instruments I am playing with at all times. I study all the great players of all the instruments. A solo is not a solo. It is an interaction with the other musicians. Listening is what separates the real creative players from the lick players, but I enjoy the lick players equally. Bright moments. Okay, so grammatically, it's already weird to say a solo is not a solo. It is an interaction with the other musicians. A solo is, of course, a solo. That's why it's called a solo. But this is interesting. He says, listening is what separates the real creative players from the lick players. I've never said that you shouldn't listen. In fact, if there's one thing I said in the video, is that you should train yourself to listen to the musicians you're playing with to see if there is something that you need to change in your own playing to fit better in that group. It's the complete opposite. So I agree that listening is what separates the creative players from the non-creative players, but it doesn't separate them from the lick players. Because here's the interesting thing. Who is a lick player? Or better yet, who is not a lick player? I think you'd be very hard-pressed naming very famous jazz musicians in history that are not lick players. And it's just the thing that lick has a negative connotation. A lick is the same as a phrase. You would never say to somebody speaking the language, oh, he's just using the standard vocabulary that everybody's using. It's not creative. No, he's using that standard language because that's the way you speak that language. That's the way you communicate with other people that speak the same language. If I think of some famous lick players or phrase players, Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Bud Powell, Django Reinhardt, Stephen Grappelli, and now famous people that play licks. Oh, there's so many people. Herbie Hancock, he invented a whole new, or McCoy Tyner. I mean, they invented a whole new language based on the old language. They just added to it with new kinds of phrases, but not after they've studied the tradition. I never heard Bob Poulos play, but usually when people tell me, I don't play phrases, I try to use my creativity. I already know how it's going to sound, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. But usually when these people start playing, it's a lot of gibberish because they didn't do the proper work of studying the language they are trying to speak. So what I hear is like random words. Maybe it's reacting to something the drummer is doing, right? Maybe the drummer is playing a triplet. They're playing a triplet too. But if the triplet doesn't consist of 3 notes that are part of a language or vocabulary I understand, it's going to sound like gibberish. It doesn't mean how much you react to other people. Okay. And then also the thing is, study all the great players of all the instruments. Well, that's impossible because studying great players means that you're actually transcribing them. Nobody has time to study all the great players on all the instruments. How are you going to transcribe a drummer if you are a saxophone player? If you don't play drums yourself, that's going to be pretty much impossible. The same goes for transcribing all the piano voicings. If you're a saxophone player, maybe you could do that, but it's just a waste of time. Okay. Better to transcribe saxophone solos. Okay, but I want to read a reaction made to this post by another user called where is it? Oh yeah, this one by JETN. He said, Bob, I had the same thought as you do. Okay, I think ear training is so important. I believe you can put your instrument down and just work on your ear and still grow by leaps and bounds. Well, that's obviously not true. And I can do a very simple thought experiment, and you have to agree with that. If I go to a random person in the street and I say, sit down, and I give him a guitar and say, well, you put your fingers down like this, right? And you do like this, okay? And play some open strings. Okay, go home without a guitar and start listening for a week for a year to Wes Montgomery, and then come back. Don't touch the guitar in that time. Just train your ear. Sing with the lines. Try to do some ear training. use the app for that, and listen a lot to Wes Montgomery and other people. And after a year, he comes back, and I give him a guitar. Is he going to sound any better than after that first lesson? No, he's going to sound worse because he didn't spend time with his instrument. Because if there's one thing I know is true, is that if you want to learn to play an instrument, you got to spend as much time with the instrument as possible. And that I don't say that lightly. I learned to play 7 instruments, 5 of them at the professional level. And I discovered in that time the only way to learn how to play an instrument is actually practice on that instrument. You cannot transfer any of the skills from another instrument to the new instrument even. Maybe a little bit, but not much. It's just a new system you have to learn. So, although ear training can be very useful, it's not true that you can grow by leaps and bounds by putting your instrument down and just work your ear. It's just not true. Okay. Let's look at another reaction to this one by Demidziak. I don't know how you pronounce it. So he is on my side of things. And he says some things that are very true. He says interaction also does not need to be harmonic. So he's now reacting to people saying that if the piano player plays a certain voicing, let's say you're playing a blues or something in F, and the first chord of the piano player is a sharp 11 sound, like something like with this B here. So, and then people say if you can hear that, then you can adapt your lines to play that B. Okay, so let's first say what Demidziak writes, and then I'll give my thoughts. Forgive me, I don't really buy into the idea of you blowing over changes, and while you are playing your lines, you suddenly hear the pianist hit a certain chord, which then triggers not only the appropriate harmonic response from you, while that chord is still ringing, but also a line that is swinging, and is a continuation of the story you were trying to tell. So, that is exactly right, and let me go to another similar reaction, so I can give my thoughts on everything. Because, okay, that's not the right one. Let me see, where is it? Is it here? Yeah, because Keith Lely writes pretty much the same thing, but on the other side, he thinks, I think ear training is important in order to interact with the rhythm section. Obviously, if a piano plays some super out there chord, the soloist isn't going to put their horn down and say, the piano player is playing this kind of chord, but they can play cool lines based using the information in that chord. And what I said back is pretty much the same as Demidziak. I said, I get what you're saying, but let's say Borelli is comping you on Sweet Georgia Brown on the first E7 and he decides to play 4 awesome sounding but completely different voicings in quick succession. You're never going to be able to react to that. Also, you start your line maybe on the beat 1. And that's a great line. And then on beat 3 and Borelli is going to play this weird E7 voicing. Right, or we play something like... you're going to adapt your line. First of all, you have to be able to hear it, and it's quick, it's fast, so probably won't happen. Are you going to adapt your line to that line? Why would you? The line you're playing is already hopefully very strong. It's a statement, and because that's the other thing which I write in this reply. I say, if everyone starts outlining the exact same harmonic extensions, colors or rhythms, the music becomes really predictable and boring. It's much more interesting if everybody takes his or her own path to that one chord in the distance. And that is right. If I play Sweet Georgia Brown and it goes to G, so it's E7, A7, D7 to G. If everybody starts playing exactly the same extensions, so let's say we're going to play sharp 9 chords on all the chords. So we're going to play... stuff like that, And then in my solo, I'm gonna play... You can already tell, even if I'm playing alone, but if you can imagine that somebody's playing, and I exactly play... That's gonna sound really boring, and it's not creative at all. I mean, now it almost sounds like somebody composed whatever what we have to do, and he made sure that everybody was doing the same thing at all times, which makes for very boring music, predictable music. Why would I want to listen to that? Already know what's gonna happen. I hear chord voicing, and I hear the same exact information in the solo line. But now let's imagine a different scenario, one I much prefer, and one you can hear on great recordings. The soloist playing their own strong line, right? He's playing a great line that fits really well on E7 and creates tension on its own. And the guitar player that's comping is creating his own story with voicings, very nice sounding voicings. And they're listening to each other, not so much to get harmonic information, but to see if they are stepping in each other's, if they're taking away from what the other guy is doing, right? Mostly it's the comper listening to the solo player, like, can I play a chord here? Or is it too busy? Should I play more calm, So stuff like that. Or the soloist is leaving a rest, and then I can play a nice voicing. So that's what I mean by playing together. But they're all taking their own harmonic path, and then they're going to that one chord. They're going to this one, and everybody lands on the one at the same time. Or even better, the solo player, the comping player is hitting the one, and the solo player is still on some kind of tension, and then also resolves at the one. At one point, they all resolve to the one. That's what makes music interesting, because everybody is waiting for this resolution that will happen at some point. And at some point, everybody will resolve to the one chord, and that's a magical moment. And it isn't magical anymore if that happens every chord. So now you might ask, but how is that gonna sound good, Christian, if everybody's doing their own thing? But you see, they're not. There is one thing that's tying them together, or there's two things tying them together. Everybody's playing the same song, so everybody knows how this song goes, right? Everybody understands where these harmonies are going. And, of course, there's rhythm, there's time. Everybody's playing in the same tempo. That is enough to create coherency. In fact, do this test. Just pick a random jazz song and just put it in the middle of the saxophone solo. If you play now, if you don't know it, so let's say it's a song you never heard, it will sound pretty weird to you, because there is no coherency for you as a listener, because you didn't hear a start of the song, you don't know where they are in the form, you didn't hear the theme. Now, if you listen from the beginning, the same moment will sound very different to you, because now there is coherency for everyone involved. For you as the listener, because you heard the start, you heard the form before they started soloing, and the coherency was already there for the musicians, of course. But see, that's how this music works. You create tension by having these clashes, although they're not really clashes, because everybody is still playing the same song. One more reaction. Let me see, what do you have? Oh, let's do something, this one. Written by Kausmo Tuminski. He or she writes, the more knowledge one has on any given subject, the better. There are no shortcuts, as he suggests. Learn the chords and melody to any given standard, learn it in all 12 keys. Play it bebop, ballad and Latin styles. Go to the masses on your instrument to learn, not some beginner trying to give you shortcuts. This goes for any instrument, full stop. Well, there's a lot of bullshit in this reaction. And the first one is, the more knowledge one has on any given subject, the better. Well, that's obviously not true. There's many stories. I also replied this, by the way, in the comment section. There's many stories of people that learned something very young by just mimicking other people. Prodigies happened on violin a bunch. And then when they got older and started meeting other good violin players or teachers, and they started noticing some weird stuff that they were doing, and they started questioning their own technique, their careers or their abilities got less instead of more. And that's because if you master something in a natural way, and but it might not be the most efficient way to do it, and then somebody tells you that, and you start doubting, you start thinking about mechanics that you were doing naturally, then the first thing that will happen is that you'll become less good. Just because you have to change so much in the natural mechanics that you are using that you'll play less good. That's a normal thing. So in order then to become just as good as you were or even better, you need to do a lot of hard work. And that's something that you need to be need to be willing to do. So just think about walking. Everybody can kind of walk, you know. Some people might walk better than others. But if I would say to someone, you know how walking works, and I would show him all the muscle groups and what kind of food he should eat to walk better, and the rhythm, and there's so much stuff to think about that I bet this person, if he would actually try to implement that all, would walk slower at first, less efficient, and it would just go worse for him. So maybe in the end, after very hard work, he would walk better. But I don't think that giving him that knowledge was for the better, like this person writes. And then he says there are no shortcuts, as he suggests. But I didn't suggest any shortcut. In fact, I suggested to cut out things that you do not need. Those are not shortcuts, because let's say you practice 4 hours a day. I practice about 4 to 6 hours a day. I started playing guitar 6.5 years ago, and I practiced every day for 4 to 6 hours. I prefer to spend those 4 to 6 hours practicing skills I actually need. I could also practice those skills for 3 hours and spend 3 hours learning other skills, like trying to hear chord voicings or intervals. But I would just spend as much time, also 6 hours, but I would get less far. So it's not a shortcut. It's just cutting out stuff you don't need to play. It depends. If you want to be able to do that, of course. If you want to be able to stand with your back to the piano and say, oh, you're playing F, G, B flat, C, D, then you should do that. But if you don't want to be able to do that, and that's the other thing, people that do that, usually they stand still, and some of the plays that, and this person like thinking, say, can you play it again? Okay, that is, in a real life situation, that's no good. I mean, this chord is being played for half a second. Somebody play for half a second plays, and he's not gonna do it again if you ask him. So it's impossible for anyone to. If I play stuff like, there's no one in the world that can tell me all these chords after hearing it once. It's not possible. It's just humanly impossible. Okay, then he goes on. Learn it in all 12 keys. Now, learn the chords and melody to any given standard. I agree with that. If you want to play a standard, learn the chords and the melody. But if you are hired to play a big concert and you have to learn 12 new songs, and you are the bass player and you're not going to play any of the themes, but you're going to play some solos, then I would say work on playing nice phrases in your solo. That might not be the theme. So, okay, but let's say you go to a jam session and you are a saxophone player. Then I'd say, learn the chords and the melody. Learned in all 12 keys. I hear that a lot. And I replied, what's better? Learning one song in 12 keys or learning 12 songs in the key that are played in 90%, but I could say 95% of the time. I think if you have to choose between those two options, then I think the second option is always better. Why not learn 12 songs in the key that they are meant to be played in? It takes just as much time, but it's much more useful. So of course you could learn everything in 12 keys. But I think it's wiser to spend that time learning a new song in a new key. Play bebop better than Latin styles. Okay, you could do that. Not some beginner. Yeah, maybe I'm a beginner. No, could be. That's something you have to decide for yourself. There's one more I wanted to do, just because to avoid some confusion. I think this person just got me wrong. He said, how can anybody play a meaningful solo without listening to the bass, the chord progression, and their movement and the rhythm group? There is a big difference between soloing on Bei mir bist du schön or something like Round Midnight or Giant Steps. Well, just to avoid any confusion. I wasn't suggesting that you can play any line at any time. In fact, I said learn, maybe I didn't say it, but what I meant, of course, is learn great lines and learn against which harmony you play them, or which chords progression. So if I didn't say that, I'm very sorry. That's what I meant, obviously. And then he says, there's also a bit more to jazz than just gypsy jazz. Yes, there's more styles, but gypsy jazz is also jazz. It sounds to me like he's trying to put down gypsy jazz. But I can tell you, as someone who plays in several styles, that gypsy jazz is just as challenging or takes just as much hard work to play well as does gypsy jazz or bebop or blues or fusion or any style that requires a lot of that has a lot of emphasis on improvisation. Okay, and then he says, last thing, Cannonball Adderley was a master of interaction. So I would challenge you to go to YouTube and listen to a full Cannonball Adderley recording. Because if there was anyone in jazz history who was a master of playing great licks and phrases, it's Cannonball Adderley. It's very obvious that he listened a lot to Charlie Parker, copied all of Charlie Parker's lines, and then did something very creative and genius with those lines. And it was able to play those lines in all kinds of situations and on all kinds of chord progressions. So I think Cannonball Adderley was a very bad example. If you would have said Chet Baker or Keith Jarrett or Stan Getz, I'd say, yeah, these people, maybe it's more difficult to find their licks, even though they probably have them. But with Cannonball Adderley, that's the lick master. Okay. These were the reactions I wanted to discuss, and I'm pretty sure I made a lot of people mad again, and I'm very sorry. Let me know, and let's have a discussion about it. I just gave you my honest opinion. I'm not in it for the money or to get you to subscribe to my site. I don't even have a site that you could subscribe to, but I might start one. No, I won't. And this is the way it's going to be. It's on YouTube. If you want to support me, you can go to Patreon, but you don't have to. You could just enjoy the content for free. If there's anything you want to do for me, subscribe to this channel, like the videos, tell your friends about it, and that's enough. Okay, see you next time. Bye.